Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 24-hour pass. This is a summit preview for 2015. We're having a lot of different sessions today for the next 22 hours. It started at 2 hours ago, and we're excited to you could join us today for Allan Hirt's session. What's new for high availability in SQL Server 2016 and Windows Server 2016? This 24-hour pass event consists of 24 consecutive live webcasts delivered by expert speakers from the PASS community. This session is a preview of one of the many technical sessions that will be presented at the summit this year in October. Recordings will be available in 1 week at www.24hourpass.com. And my name is Damu Venkatesan, and I'm also virtual chapter leader for the Healthcare SQL virtual chapter, and I'm part of the team in the data science chapter as well. And I have a quick few introduction slides before I hand over the reins to Allan Hirt. He will be speaking for 40 to 45 minutes, and then we will move on to question and answers that you can enter on the Q&A panel on the webinar. So Allan, next slide, please. Okay, so if you have any questions or if you have any experiencing any issues, just type in your questions in the panel, in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we will assist you. And two things that you want to consider is maximize your screen so that you can see the presentation really well, and feel free to enter the questions in the Q&A field at any time. Once we have question answer portion of the session, then we will start the answering. I will ask the questions to the speaker, and Allan will answer your questions. If not later, then we will cover those things later in a broader manner. Since all attendees are muted, you will need to submit your questions by typing in the Q&A field, so you don't have a chance to ask on the voice. Also, there will be a short evaluation at the end of the session. Your feedback is important to us, so please take a moment to complete it. It will appear in your web browser after the session ends. Next slide, please. And I wanted to thank all of our sponsors for this event, because without sponsors, we will not be able to bring this to you free of charge. Microsoft, Dell Software, Idera, and SQL Sentry, HP, Pyramid Analytics, all of these are sponsoring this event today. And I would like to take a moment to thank presenting sponsors, Microsoft, Dell, Idera. In addition to that, I would like to thank the supporting sponsors for the event, HP, Sentry, and Pyramid Analytics. Next slide, please. Okay, next thing is this year we're having the PASS Summit 2015 in Seattle, and I would like to get some information about that. This is PASS Summit is happening on October 27th through the 30th, and PASS Summit will have over 200 sessions with world-class SQL Server experts. Planned and presented by the SQL Server community for the SQL Server community. PASS Summit is single-handedly the largest gathering of SQL Server professionals and BI professionals in the world. Usually around more than 5,000 people attend this summit. And PASS Summit is also a great place to network and meet face-to-face with experts, peers, and MVPs. More importantly, PASS Summit delivers on providing you with answers to your SQL Server issues, along with the knowledge, strategies, and skills you need to stay ahead of the curve. You can save $200 right now by using a discount code 24HOP15 when you register, and optimize your savings by registering before the end of Sunday, September 20th. So September 20th is the deadline to use this code to get $200 off. To find more information about the PASS Summit, go to www.passsummit.com. Next slide, please. Make sure you explore everything PASS has to offer for data professionals. There's like 24 hours of PASS SQL Saturdays that happens everywhere, all around the world. It's a free one-day event happening on the Saturday, usually, run by volunteers, and all the speakers provide their time and effort and money to come and speak to you guys there. So it's a live event in your neighborhood. And there are volunteer opportunities available with the PASS for you to, volunteer. And there are PASS chapters all around the world, and there are virtual chapters online with special interest groups like, PASS Business Analytics chapter. Mine is healthcare virtual chapter and everything. So there's a lot of different PASS chapters available online for you so that you don't have to leave your desk to attend on a monthly basis. And there's a PASS community connector that comes out every month from the PASS HQ. You can sign up for that online, and there's blogs and free online resources that are available with session recordings and everything. And if you're interested in business analytics, then you should attend the Business Analytics Conference in May of next year. And there's BA Insights newsletter as well. Next slide, please. Okay, now about the speaker. So I would like to allow me to present the speaker of the hour, Mr. Allan Hirt. And Allan Hirt is a SQL Server MVP in the Microsoft cluster area, and he's trainer who specializes in all things related to mission-critical SQL Server, high availability, disaster recovery, consolidation, virtualization, administration, and more. He's based in Boston, Massachusetts, and he travels all around the world to work with and train clients. He's an excellent trainer, and Allan is currently working on the book called Mission Critical SQL Server. So look forward to that book, and you will definitely enjoy that book. Next slide, please. And if you have any questions, make sure that you put it in the panels. So, Allan, you can take it away.
Thank you very much. So welcome everybody. Hope you're enjoying 24 hours of PASS so far, and I know it's going to be a long day of some really great training. I decided this morning to do something a little different. This is a preview of my pre-con a little bit, but I decided to do something that isn't just what's going to be in my pre-con, or just say a module of my pre-con. As you may have seen, Microsoft has been releasing pretty frequent releases for SQL Server 2016. We're up to CTP 2.3 at this point. And there have also been 3 public preview releases of Windows Server 2016. So, and there are quite a few new things in both of them that will sort of affect how you think about availability, as well as affect the current features in availability. So I figured I'd take this session to talk about some of the new things coming down the pike and talk about them from a SQL Server perspective. Although this session's titled SQL and then Windows, I'm going to talk about Windows first. Now, when it comes to availability, it's hard to divorce Windows from SQL Server because we have things like clusters. So, just some quick terminology. I'm assuming that most people attending this know some of the basics, so I'm not going to cover like what is availability, what are clusters, or whatever, but I will be using some acronyms throughout. So that's why we have this quick terminology recap here. WSFC is the Windows Server Failover Cluster, or the clustering of Windows that sits underneath both clustered instances of SQL Server as well as availability groups. A node is a server participating in a Windows Server Failover cluster. AGs are availability groups. FCIs are the clustered instances of SQL Server. CSV is not what you think it is. Most people think of it as basically comma delimited values. It's clustered shared volume in my world. Witness is the specific type of voting mechanism that you would add to your quorum, but witness is not quorum. And finally, FCM is Failover Cluster Manager, or the graphical user interface provided by Microsoft in Windows for managing your clusters. All right. So one of the biggest changes, and really this has to be talked about up front because this is something people have been wanting for quite some time, is the fact that you can now create clusters without domain requirements. So anybody familiar with clustering knows that basically going back to the beginning, there had to be Active Directory involved or domain in some way. The nodes either had to be domain joined or the cluster itself needed to have things in Active Directory. So there have been some changes along the way how that's been made. In Windows 2012 R2, there was something called an Active Directory detached cluster, but the nodes themselves still had to be joined to the domain. In Windows Server 2016, you can create a cluster that is not with the nodes that are not joined to the domain. So basically, this is only for availability groups, and this gives you what you have now with database mirroring. And I'm actually going to show you a demo of this here in a minute, but think about that for a second. So if you have a disaster recovery scenario, you want to use AGs in SQL Server 2016, and by the way, this will, as far as I know, will only be supported with SQL Server 2016. So if you're thinking that you could deploy this, say, Windows Server 2016 with SQL 2014, I don't think that's going to fly. That could change, but I doubt it. But what we have here, you can now have, say, in site A, just, standalone server, B, standalone server, you create an AG. Obviously, you have your underlying Windows Server failover cluster because AGs require a cluster, but you're no longer bound by having a domain. So that meant having domain controllers in both places, in part of the same domain. So this, to some degree, simplifies your setup. There are some caveats, however. First of all, this is set up just like database mirroring with certificates. So if you've done that, this would be really familiar to you. But there's no Kerberos because Kerberos requires Active Directory. So if you're using Kerberos for your SQL Server deployments participating in your AG, you're going to need Active Directory. So you're going to have to do it the traditional way. There's a lot you're going to have to get right with your network configuration, specifically DNS or domain name service. So basically, if you can't resolve the names, this isn't going to work. You can't use any graphical tools to manage the cluster part. This will be the hardest part for many of you. So if you're not familiar with PowerShell and the PowerShell commandlets for managing a Windows Server failover cluster, you should start getting familiar with that. And right now, the only witnesses that are available for Quorum would be disk, which to me is bad because the whole point of this is that you have, standalone servers. Introducing shared disk is not my idea of making this an easy configuration. And hopefully Windows will change that. The other one would be Cloud Witness, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. So I have a link there where you can get more info on this, but without further ado, let's actually have a look at this. So I've got here a VM. It's actually two VMs, but I'm going to show you one of them. This particular one is named Eagles. And let me show you so here we have in SSMS the dashboard for an availability group. This looks, if you're familiar with availability groups, not the most exciting thing, but, here we go. I've got two replicas. My primary is Eagles, or this VM that we're looking at here, and my secondary is Phillies. So by and large, looks like a normal availability group. Nothing out of the ordinary here. Now I also have a listener named Fanatic, so now you shouldn't do this normally at home in SSMS, but just to show you that the listener is working, give me a second here while this connects. So there, the listener's working again. Perfectly fine normal availability group. Now, again, those of you familiar with availability groups know that for enabling the feature, it's done on the SQL Server service. And the underlying server has to be a node in a cluster. So here we have that. My Windows failover cluster is named the vet.
Yeah, Alan, can you make it a little bigger?
No, that's about as big as it gets. Now, they can also zoom in using their zoom
At the bottom.
At the bottom.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So so I've got two nodes, Phillies and Eagles. My Windows cluster name is the vet. So again, everything looks normal right now. However, we're going to start to see a difference here in a second. So if I bring up, oops, wrong key combination. There we go. System view. And we zoom in. Now, notice here, it's part of a work group. Now you'll see there is a full computer name. It says eagles.multidomaina.lab. That's one of the networking things. So and I'm going to show you what that is. That's here. So I'm going to just move this down and then zoom in for you guys. So you have to put the DNS suffix. That's one of the main things you have to do here. But reinforcing this, there's no domain join here. And this is true of the Phillies node as well. So I'm in just a work group. I have no domain connectivity. And to further reinforce that, just for fun, now again, you should not do this in a production environment normally, but just to drive the point home, if we look at the service account that I'm using, I'm just using the built-in network service. I'm not using a domain account for managing my services on my instances participating in the availability group. So this is a full, complete, 100% local instance participating in a Windows Server failover cluster, and I have an AG built on top of it. Now, if I show you this, get cluster group, there we go, G through get cluster resource. So I'll zoom in here just so you can see this better, but you'll see this all looks normal. Here's my availability group. I've got IP addresses in both subnets. So this is a multi-subnet Windows failover cluster. So this would be that DR scenario. This is really exciting stuff because this is a scenario to be able to sort of transition from database mirroring and what we have now, and when you want to take advantage of availability groups, you can now have that pretty much completely disconnected scenario, even with clustering, which we were not able to do before in any version of Windows. I'm sure you guys have some questions around this, and I've got some other slides to get through, obviously, so I will take them at the end. But I wanted to show this to you because this is live, this is real, this is not screenshots. This is actually something built on things that you can do today in Technical Preview 3 of Windows Server 2016, as well as CTP 2.3 of SQL Server 2016. So you can build this on your own. This is not just something I can do. You can go build this yourself. So very cool stuff. All right. Getting back to the slide deck. Another thing that we have here is site awareness. So in Windows Server failover clustering right now, there is no concept of sites, really. They had a little bit of stuff that they built into 2012 R2 but not really. In 2016, they formally introduced the concept of sites. So you can have a preferred site. Now, one of the benefits of this is that it allows you to essentially now have much easier say, you can have things running in one data center, things running in another data center, and you can basically configure your roles in the cluster to have a preferred site. So let's say, in Dallas, you have some of your cluster nodes, and then you have some other ones in Chicago. You could configure your roles, say, I want the primary ones here to be mainly running in Chicago, and only if you have to run in Dallas. So lots of good stuff here. Now, there is going to be a bit of a confusion with preferred owners, and I'll show you that in a second as well. And I haven't fully tested all the scenarios out here yet. This is all fairly new. But let me show you what this looks like a little bit. So if we now go to this, log in here. So this is Windows Server 2016. All right. So if I do this, for example, I already defined these. These are not GUI options. These are things you'd have to do in PowerShell. But you'll see here, for example, for my cluster, the main Windows cluster, I defined one of the sites, right? It's site A. Now, the site is actually defined sort of at the node level. So if we look here, this is my cluster named Spectrum. It has two nodes, Flyers and Sixers. So Flyers is in site B, Sixers is in site A. So once I define the things at the node level, I then went and defined my preferred site, which is Spectrum. So preferred site is site A. Now this is purely at the node and cluster level, but you can also do this for your roles. Now a role is the collection of resources, so that would be your AG or an FCI. Let's get cluster role, where is it? There we go. Let me zoom in here. Now I only defined it for, in this one I have an FCI, but here it's that Bobby Clark one. So for that one I'm basically saying, for this particular FCI, I would prefer to live in site A. Now that may not be the cluster preferred site, but for this particular FCI, I want to hopefully live in site A. So this is, again, good for DR type of scenarios, but again, also taking preferences of if I've got more than one site running things, then what's the preferred site for that particular thing that's running? So nice enhancements, evolution of the species. Quorum. Not a lot of time today to talk about Quorum. Quorum could be a whole day. I did a nice talk last year, or was it the year before, on Quorum that's up. It was a spotlight session that you can look up on the past site. So if you want to know the basics of Quorum, by all means, go to that. But building on what they did in 2012 R2, you could lose 50% of your voters, whether they're nodes or not. But because of this whole site awareness thing, that now factors into Quorum. And if you have a preferred site defined, the votes will drop out of the non-preferred site or sites first before they would drop out of your first site. And when I mentioned the sort of site awareness, that was sort of achieved through lower Quorum priority node ID. So all this new stuff basically supersedes all that, which is why that particular thing is deprecated in in Windows Server 2016. We've also got a new witness type called a cloud witness. That link there will take you to some more information, but basically, really simply, this is very similar to a file share witness, except it would be in the cloud. So if your nodes have internet connectivity, then you can actually use Cloud Witness. It's nothing major. It does require Azure. You cannot use AWS, but it's very small. Shouldn't be a lot of cost because it's just blob storage. It's like 1K or something like that for the file. So there will not be a lot of resources. There's nothing fancy about it. So if you want to give that a shot, that will allow you to have easier multi-site configurations. They've also, because of, again, the site awareness stuff, enhanced some of the properties to handle networking underneath the covers, and based on experience, they've upped some of the thresholds to allow for transient issues with your network. For example, cross-subnet threshold is now a default value of 20, where it was lower than that before. There are about 6 or 7 of them that are changed in Windows Server 2016, but the one nice thing about the Windows folks, as well as SQL, is they realize that more and more people are doing these complex configurations, and there needs to be a bit more tolerance with networking, because some things are truly transient, and they didn't want the cluster to sort of have a failover happen because of a transient issue. Obviously, something more major is going to cause a failover. Okay. Couple of new node states. Isolated, quite simply, is that basically the node can host the availability group or clustered instance, but for whatever reason, it's not an active member right now. It's not that it was evicted, just it's not in the cluster. It could be down, whatever. So it's isolated. They basically renamed that state. It's not just down. Now, quarantine is interesting. Quarantine is much more useful. So those of you that may have had, say, transient issues on, say, a single cluster node that goes up and down, well, what they did in Windows Server 2016 is if you have a node and the default is 3 times within an hour, that basically flops and goes down. Okay? If it flops and goes down 3 times, it's basically going to quarantine that node, and Windows is going to say, hey, we think something is wrong with this node, so we're not going to kind of let it participate right now. And these are things that you can configure if you want it to be 1, you want it to be, 5, whatever. Now, what it will then do is it quarantines it for 2 hours, which you can override with something similar to forcing quorum. It's the CQ switch when you start the cluster node. Up to 20% of the nodes can be quarantined at any given time. Obviously, if you're having to quarantine more than 20% of your nodes, something's going wrong in your cluster. But this is kind of cool. Now, you may say, well, this isn't a good thing because, well, it's going to move my stuff. Well, but the whole point is if you've got a node that's failing on you, right, or having a lot of issues, it's going to take it out of the equation. Right? Before, it wouldn't really do that. Clustering would just, let it flop all day long, right? And you would have to manually intervene. Here, it's basically saying, okay, we're noticing a recurring theme here. Let's take care of the problem. So I think this is actually a really nice enhancement. There are some other things that are put in mainly for VMs, but I'm talking about this from the SQL perspective of how SQL Server will be able to take advantage of these features. There are some other parts of these that SQL cannot, and I'm not really talking about those. Another one in the cluster is storage replica. So I don't have a demo of this, but for storage replica, I'm missing a slide somewhere in here. All right. I uploaded it. Basically, I had a picture of what quarantine looks like. So it should be in the deck that you guys get. I apologize for not showing up. Storage replica. This is another big one. So, actually, let me make sure I'm looking at the right deck. Hold on a second. No, I am. Yeah. Oh, no wonder I had the thing hidden. Presenter fail. So, in the UI, I'll say quarantine, but here I'll zoom in real quick. There we go. So it's basically saying, hey, if I started to try and restart this node, it's been quarantined. And you notice here it says that Tweety is down. So, again, very cool. All right, getting back to storage replica. Sorry about that. So, right now, the only way to get your data over to another place is use something like availability groups or do it at what we call block level storage or at the storage unit. Well, built into Windows Server 2016 is something called Storage Replica. And Storage Replica is something that you could use with FCIs, and you can now do block level replication in Windows without any proprietary vendor solutions. You may still not want to do this. You may still want to use your vendor solution. That's perfectly fine. Microsoft's okay with that too, but this is just another option that you could take advantage of. Obviously, as with any hardware-based, you're going to have to worry about things like networking. It's not transactional. It's not integrated with SQL Server. This is a platform-level feature. But if you're using FCIs and you want to use this type of thing, your sysadmins and you guys can have a chat. And if you feel it's something you want to do, by all means, give it a whirl. You don't have to go out and spend a lot of money for an additional optional feature on your storage unit. So very cool. I have a link there to some videos Microsoft put up on showing you how this all works. Nice stuff. Another one is Storage Spaces Direct. I haven't seen a lot of folks use storage spaces with SQL Server, but Storage Spaces Direct is sort of the evolution of this. There's regular storage spaces, and there's this new feature in 2016, which is Storage Spaces Direct. The acronym for this from Microsoft is S2D. And with S2D, basically, this is all software-defined storage. So you have some sort of disks properly configured, whether they're local inside or they are attached in a JBOD to the cluster nodes themselves. Then you create software-defined storage on them through scale-out file server. I have a link there, which you will see for, I did a storage talk where I talk a bit about scale file server if you want to know more about that. But you can take advantage of very high-speed networking, which can be faster than fiber. And we've implemented it with customers, and it's really amazing. Not Storage Spaces Direct, but the fast networking stuff. And this basically lets you have a whole software-defined storage stack that's really fast, reliable, and available. It's not something everybody's going to want to do. It was largely put in for Hyper-V, but I'm going to actually show you this working with SQL Server FCIs, and it's very cool. It's a nice feature that, yeah. So let me show you this. So this will be the other cluster I was showing you, this S2D thing here with the Sixers and Flyers. So just quickly showing you that this is an FCI. This is my Bobby Clark instance. And if I zoom in here real quick, you'll see is clustered is true, meaning this is an FCI. And with this one, there's no restriction, so I've got my clustered instance. Now notice you don't see any storage in here. That's because I'm using Storage Spaces Direct, which is using Scale-Out File Server, which is a specialized clustered file share, which is this thing right here. So actually, let me look at shares real quick. So I've got this, it's S2D test, okay? Now if I look at my storage within SSMS, and let's say I create a database. You will see, if I scroll over here for what it's using the SMB path of whack SQL S2D and then that shared that I just showed you in failover cluster manager, S2D test. So this builds on what the SMB support that came into SQL Server 2012. That's how you can take advantage of all this. So SMB is not new to SQL Server. Using scale-out file server is not new because we've done that in the past. This is basically using it all because all of this is defined on the nodes themselves of the cluster. Nothing is external. That's the main difference here, is that all this defined stuff, all the storage is attached right here. So you'll see that I've got, and part of this configuration is I've got a storage pool and I've got virtual disks. So by the way, here are the enclosures. This will take a second to come up. There they are. So basically, these are the disks that are attached locally. They show up as enclosures. Now, by the way, this will not be supported like this in a VM environment. I'm going to be very clear about this. You should not try this in a production environment. This is just for demo purposes. This will need to be on real hardware. And then we've got a CSV where then I carve out these virtualized disks upon. So again, very interesting. If you look at that storage talk that I did, I talked more about what scale-out file server is and why this is sort of defined the way it is. But like I said, the difference there is that normal scale-out file server, you're going over SMB to something external. Here, SMB is all basically internal, and all the disks are all local to all the nodes. So very cool stuff. I'm actually pretty excited about this. This is something that Hyper-V can also take advantage of as well, but the FCI scenarios where you can take advantage of it in the SQL world. Okay, moving on. So another thing that's come back, which has been gone for over 10 years, is the ability to upgrade a Windows cluster to the next version as sort of what we're calling a rolling upgrade. It's not supported necessarily in the way that you think. Basically, you either add new nodes at the new level, like so in this case it's 2016. It's basically n-1, so your nodes would need to be at 2012 R2. So if you've got clusters that are, say, Windows Server 2012 and you want to go to 2016, that's a complete new build. But if you've got nodes that are 2012 R2, what you basically do is you either add nodes that are 2016 to that cluster, and that doesn't mean something can run in production forever. It's a special state. Or you basically roll a node out, build it as 2016, roll it into the cluster, and then at some point when everything is at 2016, you run that commandlet, update cluster functional level, and now your entire cluster is functioning at 2016. You can take advantage of all the features of 2016. But while you're in that mixed state, it's running at the 2012 R2 functional level. So anything like I just showed you, for example, storage spaces direct, that kind of stuff is not going to work until your full cluster is at 2016. But this will make migration a lot easier. It's a little bit more work on the SQL Server side because right now the way it's supported, you're going to have to reinstall the SQL stuff. But it's still better than building an entirely new cluster. So I consider this progress. The last time we had rolling upgrades was, I believe, Windows 2000 Server Advanced or Data Center or Windows Server 2003. So it's been a long time. Welcome back. There are enhancements to the log. So I'll show you this real quick in a minute. Basically, one of the challenges in troubleshooting was that if your cluster nodes were, say, in Eastern time zone and you had UTC, you had to do math, this is all called out in the log. There's a new event channel. There's active memory dump in Windows. This is actually pretty cool. So even if you're not doing clusters, just plain standalones, not using AGs or anything, if you basically have, say, a server with a 0.5 terabyte or a terabyte of memory, and you didn't want to create a huge, basically, dump file, you can save up to about 90% because it's only going to dump the active pages. So it's actually a really cool feature. I'll show you where that lives. And let me go there real quick. Up here. So the cluster log stuff. So I'll zoom in here in a second, but you see here, here's a build. But notice here, it's the UTC time plus offset. That's the stuff I was talking about. It's telling you up front, hey, if you're trying to troubleshoot in your nodes, or we have one in New York, one in London, and they didn't set the time zone to be coordinated universal time, it tells you what it was generated on at the node versus what UTC is. So that's actually really handy. Another thing they've also done, for example, and there's more, but I just want to give you some highlights, is it actually gives you the configuration of the resources and the groups and everything. This is all comma delimited, so you can pull this into, say, Excel and look at this information. And then there's, again, a whole ton more here. But they've added a lot of nice stuff in here for troubleshooting. Now, let me show you real quick where that active memory dump thing is. So if we go to System and change settings, Advanced. Okay, I'm going to zoom in here in a second. Okay. So where you set your page file, right, there's obviously the word of advice for a long time has been basically, if you've got large memory, don't create a big file, because you're going to do that, right? So that little thing down there, active memory dump, is what you'd want to set if you've got large SQL servers, whether they're physical or virtual. And so again, you can read more about this. There's stuff out there on Windows, but I wanted to point that out to you because this is not just an availability and clustering one. This is something that you can take advantage of in 2016, even if you're not doing any of that stuff. Finally, if you're doing guest clusters under Hyper-V, there's a new extension, VHDS. There's storage resiliency, which I didn't really talk about here because it's mainly a Hyper-V concept that they built in for VMs. It can take advantage of that. Previously, you couldn't do things like resize the files online. You'd have to take them offline, resize them so you'd have an availability outage. You can use Hyper-V Replica, and you can use, say, a traditional host-level based backup for guest clusters, which you couldn't do before. So if you're looking at clustering under Hyper-V as VMs using shared VHDX, lots of nice new enhancements there. Okay, now let's get on to SQL Server. Now it's going to seem a little paltry in comparison here, but you'll see why I talked about the other stuff, because they're the foundation of a lot of what we do. It impacts what we do in SQL Server. What they've done in SQL Server, actually quite a few things, but they're much more straightforward and things that are evolutional. So first thing we have here are some availability groups enhancements. So we're up from 2 to 3 automatic failover pairs that we can do. So we can have up to 3 synchronous, but only 2 could be automatic prior in 2012 and 2014. In 2016, we can have up to 3 not only synchronous, but also automatic failover partners. So that would say, let's say you had a 3-node cluster with your AG. Now, all nodes could be an automatic failover partner. However, if you have a preferred secondary replica, you're going to have to configure that at the Windows level, probably using preferred owners at the role level. So preferred owners, just so you know, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, I'll show it to you here on this FCI. Go back to roles. If we look at the properties of the role, you'll see here preferred owners. that's where you would configure that. So that's the one thing about AGs that some people don't like, is that they didn't obfuscate some of the stuff you need to do in the cluster. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. And one of the reasons why, as DBAs, we really should know much more about the platform. Another enhancement, again, may not seem like a big deal to some, but is actually really an important improvement, is the fact that when you have readable secondaries and you had more than one, basically it just went in order. So unless the first one was down and you were using the listener to connect to it, it would always go to that first one. When you create your readable secondaries now, they can be load balanced with a round-robin algorithm. So that red stuff there that's highlighted, that's the change in syntax. So if you have more than one that you want to be round-robin, that's how you would do it. I don't have a demo of this, but just know that this is a feature that a lot of people requested. Another one that they've done, largely because Microsoft's had some customers that have used, let's say, internal fast disks, be they Fusion IO or some form of flash-based SSD, whatever, high network throughput, and they found that there was probably some room for improvement in the way that all worked. So they've overhauled the log transport, basically getting your transactions from your primary to your secondary replicas. So that'll work better in 2016 than it did in prior versions in 2012 and 2014. Microsoft is not committing to any improvement number. They're just saying it's better. So if you're going to say, well, how much better is it, Allan? Well, first of all, I don't have Fusion IO cards or anything of that ilk at home that I can test with. But secondly, Microsoft's not saying, and I couldn't publish benchmarks anyway. So just letting you know. Another huge one that basically this killed a lot of AG deployments for me is that SQL Server 2016 finally supports distributed transactions as part of an availability group. However, the big caveat here is you got to do it when you configure your availability group. Otherwise, you're going to have to basically tear down your AG and recreate it. It's not an afterthought. But if you're using distributed transactions, you can now properly use availability groups with no caveats of, well, it should work most of the time, but in failover, you might get in trouble. No more of that. They've improved some of the health model stuff. So basically, if a database is going offline and you have automatic failover, it'll trigger a failover, whereas before, if a database went offline, it wouldn't necessarily trigger a failover. That's configurable via TSQL and GUI. And same thing, there's the DB failover option. It's DB failover option. However, there's a caveat right now in the current 2.3 build of SQL Server 2016. The PowerShell commandlets do not have these. So if you're configuring these via PowerShell commandlets, I'm pretty sure Microsoft is aware, and I'm sure it'll get into a future CTP, but currently stick to the GUI or T-SQL for those. Finally, the last thing I'm going to talk about as improvements is that group managed service accounts are fully supported for FCIs in 2016. Basically, you could look at 2016 as the coming out party for GMSAs. I'm not sure how fully they were supported. In fact, I don't think they really were at all prior to 2016 with anything. I think they kind of worked, but there was no official support. So basically, if you're looking to use GMSAs, welcome to 2016. This is not version of Windows dependent, by the way. If you're going to deploy SQL 2016 on 2012 R2, this would be supported. So this is purely a SQL thing and not a Windows thing, because this came in Windows 2012. So the big deal about GMSAs is that it's not a normal domain account. It is a special managed service account that you then manage at the domain level. So if you're not changing passwords, there really should be no downtime associated with that. It's a nice thing. Let me just show you quickly what that looks like, because I want to get to some questions. And I know we're tied up against the hour for the other presentation. I want to make sure that I give you guys time to switch over. So what I also did on the this cluster was I gave it a GMSA. So if we look at the services here, I'm going to zoom in real quick. Now, here it looks normal, but if I scroll over, you'll see it's that $sign, okay? Now, on the back end, in Active Directory, let me show you my domain controller real quick. Of course, open behind. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with Active Directory, welcome to a domain controller. So there's this whole class here called Manage Service Accounts, okay? And you'll see here, I created two, one for agent, one for the service. So that's what those things are. And you can set them up after, obviously. I mean, with an FCI, they need to be domain-based accounts anyway. And that's one of the reasons why you can't use the domain-less stuff for FCIs because, well, FCIs depend on a domain still. But this is really nice. I know some people have been doing this. Here's what it looks like in setup when you see the DEX. So, like, for example, on the add node operation, you're not having to put in any passwords. It's grayed out. It's just there. It works. So this is SQL finally supporting this for FCI. So I'm pretty excited about this. I know a lot of other people probably are too. But anyway, so to summarize, there's lots of changes. Arguably just as many on SQL, but they're straightforward. We know what those are. They're evolutions. They're things that you guys as DBAs have been requesting as enhancements to the platform. But on the Windows side, it's a lot of stuff that you're probably not as familiar with, but may have a huge impact on SQL servers, such as the site awareness stuff. And I would say arguably the biggest one for you guys as DBAs is the DTC support, as well as the no domain for your clusters. So my suggestion to you guys, start evaluating this now because these builds are out there. The sooner the better. If you want to see more of this stuff, I'm doing an advanced availability architectures and deployments, of which I will be going to some of this stuff in a little more depth, especially things like site awareness and quorum and combining FCIs and AGs. There are hands-on labs. And one of the labs that I'm planning actually is building that domainless cluster. So if you really want to get your hands on early, I'm also going to have some stuff on current tech too that you're going to have hands on with. But if you really want to get in early, last year sold out. I have a limited number of seats because of the labs. They're capped. So sign up for my pre-con. It's Monday. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm also on a panel session during the week. We're going to be talking about will the DBA job of the future still involve DBAs? So that'll be fun with two friends of mine, Karen Lopez and Jen McCown. So hope to see you during the week. We'll also have a booth, SQL HA, at PASS, so come and see me there. And with that, we've got a couple minutes left. Let's open things up for questions. Please fill out your evaluations. I can only improve as a speaker or my deck if you give me honest feedback. So I would appreciate it if after this, when they push these out, that you go evaluate the sessions. Thank you so much, and let's take questions.
All right. Thank you, Allan, for the great presentation today. And let's start on the questions. So there's a question from Jared Carney on how is this beneficial? That is, why wouldn't I want a domain?
So one of the challenges with clustering in general is that domains sort of without going into a long detail, they made some changes in Windows Server 2008 where you had to create some objects in Active Directory. Clusters became less easy from a Windows configuration perspective, and it's often why installations of, say, FCIs or configurations of listeners fails, because these objects can't get created on the back end. That was why they introduced Active Directory detached clusters in 2012 R2, but the nodes had to be domain joined. Here, this basically takes away that reliance on those objects in Active Directory that were introduced in Windows Server 2008. So this should make deployment for some easier, but like I said, there are some caveats like the no Kerberos thing, because Kerberos does require Active Directory. So there are trade-offs that will be made, but for a lot of people in most normal situations, that's why not having a domain for some people is actually a good thing, because it does complicate your deployments.
Okay, thank you. And Conan Farrell is asking whether it's an enterprise-only feature. This,
So there's no enterprise in Windows. So so if you could clarify there, are you talking about SQL Enterprise, and which feature are you talking about? So with Windows, everything I showed you in Windows is in Standard Edition, as far as I know. Windows in 2012 and 2012 R2 did not segment anything. Right now, availability groups are still Enterprise Edition. I'm still hoping that's going to change. We'll see. But everything that I showed you should be in Standard Edition of Windows.
okay, great. Next question is he's talking about the quarantine threshold.
Yep.
Is there? Can we modify the current quarantine threshold as well?
Yes. So those can be modified in PowerShell. I didn't show that to you, but they're just configuration things. Those are done. It's a cluster parameter at the main cluster level. But yes, those are configurable.
Okay, that was from JD Gonzalez. Okay, the next question is from Brian Hammes. Is the storage spaces direct URL at the bottom correct? I'm not getting what I should be for that link.
It should be. If not, I will get it corrected in an uploaded deck to you guys. So I will double check that. It should have been, and if not, I'll make sure it is. We have probably time for one or two more quick questions so we can make sure that the 11 o'clock happens on time.
Yep. Okay, there's only two more questions there. So we currently have 3 clusters running mirrored SQL Server on 3 physical machines, SQL 2012, Server 2012, with VMs under Hyper-V. We decided not to go with SQL Cluster 2012 R2 as it wasn't stable at that time. What are the advantages and disadvantages of going to SQL Cluster as opposed to mirroring SQL size 4 terabytes online? That's from Dave Crozier.
Okay, so that's a long question that unfortunately we don't have time to answer in this forum. But basically, I will say this: clustering is not unstable. So I'd be curious if you sent me an email or sent me a message on Twitter why you think that. But yeah, that's a long answer for unfortunately not a lot of time that we have. So I apologize for that. Come see me at PASS if you want to have that question, or again, ping me. Yeah, I'm not through the website or Twitter. In time for the one last question before we got to get dumped here.
Okay. What is the planned release date for Mission Critical SQL Server book?
So I just did a blog post on that, but basically primary writing should be done soon. But go to my latest blog post. I talk about that.
Okay. One more quick question is why is one of the first demo screens showed IP 20.102 was offline? Because this IP is secondary replica?
That is correct. So basically, you can only have an IP address where, say, the AG is. So if your AG is living in site A, which has a subnet of 19, that's where it's not an and, it's an or. So you only have one IP address active at any time.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Allan. Thank you for the great presentation. And Awesome to have you. So looking forward to see you at the PASS, and hope everybody attended here will join you for the pre-con, and definitely we'll see you there. Thank you very much. Appreciate all of you attending today.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye.